Welcome back to Old School Sports and our OOTP 23 playthrough of the Kansas City Royals. We are at the beginning of free agency in the 2036 to 2037 offseason. The good news is that the Royals have a lot of money to spend this offseason, or at least more than we typically have. The kind of bad news is that the reason we have so much money to spend is our longtime franchise superstar Bobby Witt Jr. somewhat surprisingly retired. He had really deteriorated in terms of his abilities over about the last 18 months, and he decided to call it a career after the Royals won their third consecutive World Series. So we're going to be going for 4 in a row in the upcoming season. We've got a lot of work to do this offseason to hopefully ensure we've got as good a chance as possible. Even with the departure of Witt, don't feel like we've got any huge holes in our lineup. Right now, Willie Flores is slotted in as our starting third baseman. The only thing I would like to kind of potentially do is we've got Willie Flores at third now, and Ernesto Laziosi at second base, and Rich Alvarado and Billy Dominguez as our backup infielders. If I could find someone who could play second and or third base at a pretty high level, would not mind bringing them on board as a free agent. Flores and Laziosi are both fragile and have both suffered pretty regular injuries over the course of their careers. You can see in the case of Willie Flores, played just 70 games last year, and in 4 years where he's been a full-time major leaguer, he's played over 104 games just once. Some of that is that he was in a platoon role earlier in his career and was kind of a super sub, but some of it has also been driven by injuries. And Laziosi, over the course of his career, has had pretty significant injury issues also. You can see he's played just 60 games last year, and he's never played more than 138 games in a season. So with those two guys being potentially banged up over the course of the year, would not mind if we could find a really good infielder who could potentially start over one of them at third or second, or at the very least have a little more defensive versatility than a Rich Alvarado, or potentially have a somewhat better bat than a Billy Dominguez as one of our top players off the bench. So that's one thing that we're looking for. And then pitching-wise, our rotation is kind of set, and we've already made a couple moves back in arbitration time, trading away Mike McNeil, who was one of the good prospects in our system. Traded him away to bring on Kyle Smith to hopefully bolster our bullpen, a young player also like McNeil, who we think can be a really good reliever. But the rotation is set with Hillman, Borgman, Lagerwelch, Rivera, and Estrada. The big question is Borgman. He's wrecked physically, almost a two-pitch pitcher at this point, and he's coming off a pretty mediocre 5.34 ERA. He's always been a finesse pitcher, never thrown all that hard. The only good news is that he is in the last year of his contract. I have looked about shopping him around, and there's really no one in the league interested in taking on that contract. So we're going to hope that he can remain healthy and be somewhat effective in this upcoming season. But clearly it would not hurt us to add a little more talent into our bullpen. And if we can also add a pitcher who could potentially be a starter for us when we inevitably suffer some injuries to the starting rotation, that wouldn't be the worst thing in the world, since a guy who would likely potentially fill that role, Dan Keough, is a guy that we're actively looking to move on from at this point. Was our second-round pick back in 2028. Had big expectations for him, but in 112 major league innings, he's given up 36 home runs and pitched his way to a 5.85 ERA. Given that he doesn't throw that hard and he doesn't have much movement on his pitches, I don't think that that's going to really change. So we're probably going to look at some point this offseason to get what we can for Mr. Keough and move on. And looking at the batters that are available, some big names: O'Neill Cruz, Juan Soto, Gerald Nin out there, none of whom we're going to chase after. They're all looking for more than 30 million a year. They're all in their 30s. A player who does intrigue us a little bit is third baseman Michinao Nishi. Came over from Japan, where you can see he's the MVP of the Japanese League very consistently 7 times, including I think 6 in a row. He's going to be 35 years old shortly. He's fragile physically. He's a solid glove, good personality, and looks like he will be an above average major league bat. He still did lead the Japanese League with 36 home runs last year. And when you look over the course of his career over there, he's obviously been a premier player, as we've talked about. He would definitely fill that niche of someone who could play third base for us and allow us to put either Flores or Laziosi into more of a utility role. Concern is that he's 35 years old, he's unproven in the United States, and he's looking for 5 years at an average of almost $25 million a year. Now, the positive thing is that, as I talked about at the beginning of the episode, we do have money to spend, but I certainly don't want to get involved in a 5-year contract with a player like him. If we could do a very short contract, he might be an option. And the only reason I even say that is that we're not going to go after one of those more expensive free agents. The rest of the free agents out there are kind of older or fill positions that we don't really need to focus on. And then when we look at the pitchers who are available, there's a lot of respectable relief pitchers, but there's really nobody who is going to really help our starting rotation all that much. The only pitcher with any stamina is a 17-year-old from Korea, who you can see we have offered a minor league contract to. He's a player who could become a really nice bullpen arm down the line with a good personality, but he's 17 years old and he's kind of looking for more than just a minor league contract. I mean, I guess we could try to offer him minor league contract and an optional signing bonus. I wouldn't mind bringing him on board, so we'll see what he thinks about a $100,000 signing bonus. And he's willing to at least think of that. Obviously not somebody who's going to help us right away, but not a bad pitcher to bring into our system who could be a decent reliever for us 4 or 5 years down the line if he does fully develop. But although he did have the stamina, you probably saw he really only has 2 pitches, so he's never going to be a starter either. So not a ton of talent out there on the free agent market, and that is the only reason why I'm going to at least consider bringing on Michinao Nishi, but going to definitely look at other options before we potentially pull the trigger. And as I said, we're definitely not going to offer him a 5-year contract. I'd like to offer him a 1-year deal. We'd probably, if we got involved with him, have to offer him at least a few years, and we'll try to put in as many team options as possible if we do bring him on board. In doing a player search for people that we could potentially trade for, instead of spending the big money that we would need to spend on Nishi, there's obviously some incredible players out there. Manny Vela from the Red Sox, who's already won, I believe, multiple MVP awards. Actually, only one MVP award, but he's also only 26 years old. And you can see Flores and Laziosi both meet the criteria we're looking for of a decent defensive third baseman who's at least an acceptable-ish kind of hitter. Obviously some great players, some very expensive players. The two that seem to be players we could potentially bring on in trade are Dave Orquiza, who is a third baseman for the Rangers. You can see he can play second, third, or short. You don't feel great about playing him at third, don't feel great about playing him at short, but he's definitely a respectable second baseman or third baseman. Pretty average-ish batting profile. Do like the fact that he's durable. over the course of his major league career, he's been a bit above average in terms of his OPS plus and his WRC plus, put up a 4.3 WAR. He was even an all-star back in 2033. The price tag for him is high, but it's not exorbitant. He is signed for the next 4 upcoming seasons, so and his number starts getting a little bit high, I think, for what he is. But he's an option if we decided we didn't want to just invest the money into Nishi. And then another option that's out there is Andrew Lovely from the Yankees. Also a guy who could absolutely play second base and third base, short in a pinch, even a little better defensively than Orquiza, I'd say. They're both 27 years old. He's got a little more power, I think, but if you look at the batting stats that he's put up over the course of his career, he has not been quite as productive. Does have a higher career WAR, I think in part to his glove, and also just in part to the fact that he has played more than Orquiza. The issue with Lovely is that his contract's even higher than Urquiza's. It's also for 4 years through his early 30s. But he's going to be making close to $13 million a year in each of those last 2 seasons. And looks like we could get him if we wanted to trade away Dan Keough. Certainly, I think Lovely would be more helpful to us next season than Dan Keough. But the question is whether, we should pay the salaries that we're going to be paying to someone like Lovely or Urquiza, in addition to giving up trade assets for them, or do we just try to bring on Nishi, where all we have to do is give him money, and we do have money to spend next year. I think I'm inclined to try to just do it with money. Nishi's a lot older than those guys, and he's also fragile. But he's probably a better defensive third baseman given his excellent arm, and he's also a better batting profile even though he is older. So I think in terms of being a win-now team, if we can get him to even think about a 1-year deal, I think that's probably the way for us to go. Now, I don't think he's going to do that. We're probably going to have to give him many years and more money than we'd like to. But at first blush, if I can make a short-term offer to Nishi and not have to give up any players in our system to get him on board, I think that's what I'm going to try to do. And I have a feeling Nishi's not going to like this offer. As we talked about, he was looking for almost $25 million a year average over 5 years. We are offering him 3 years at $18 million a year with team options for both the second and third seasons. We did include the no trade clause that he wanted, but since it's basically a 1-year contract with 1-year options from our perspective, there's still not a lot of risk. We bumped up the potential bonuses for MVP or All-Star a little bit. We'll make it even more for All-Star. I don't think there's any way that he's going to consider this, but if we could bring him on board for this type of contract that's very low risk, and doesn't require us giving up any potentially valuable minor league assets as we'd have to bring on Lovely or Urquiza, I think this makes sense as our first try. Yeah, and he's looking for a little less money now, but not that much less, and he still wants the 5 years. So probably going to have to bump it up a little bit to have any chance of getting him on board. All right, we're going to come back to him with something a little more, hopefully appetizing. You can see we put the average annual value up to $21 million, a little front-loaded with $23 million this year, followed by team options for $20 million each of the 2 seasons after that. Even bumped up his potential all-star bonus a tiny bit. I don't think he'll go for this, but it is significant movement with us increasing the average annual value by $3 million a year. He wants to meet us in the middle. He wants 4 years with an average of $22 million. But you'll notice that he's not putting any of his team options in, so we're still relatively far apart. This might be our final offer. He was looking for $22 million average over 4 years. We're actually giving him a $22 million average over 3 years, obviously a bit front-loaded, followed by the 2-team options. He wanted 4 years at the same average money with no team options. So we're definitely still off in terms of some of the bells and whistles in the contract. It's definitely more advantageous for us as the team than he is looking for, but we'll see what he thinks. And he's not willing to think about that, and now he's looking for up to $23 million. So we're just going to hold tight right now. I don't know how much demand there's really going to be for him at the kind of numbers that he's looking for. So we're going to play the long game, knowing that we can probably put something together for Orquiza or Lovely if we need to several months from now when we get closer to spring training. And I don't really feel like there's anyone else that I need to chase after right now. Would love to get Keough signed for our minor league system, but we're still going to be thinking about eventually trading away Keough. But since he could also be a guy who could potentially help us get somebody like Orquiza or Lovely, we're not going to really jump on anything right away. And we do have some good news. Keough with the $100,000 bonus is signed to our minor league system. So again, not somebody who's going to help us right away, but he's going to be 18 years old at the start of next season. Definitely think he looks like he's ready to at least start seeing what he can do in rookie ball. And he could eventually develop into a useful right-handed arm out of our bullpen. So for $100,000, I think that's definitely a risk worth taking. And as the winter meetings begin, a few of the big free agents have already signed. You can see O'Neill Cruz, Juan Soto, and Gerald Nin all off the list. So among the position players, Nishi, at least according to the very simplistic and admittedly simplistic star ratings, is the best player that's out there. Haven't heard back from him since we kind of broke off negotiations. Looking at the pitchers, you can see a little more talent still out there with some of the high-end relievers that are out there. Definitely intrigued by Felipe Tejada, who had a nice year as our closer one season ago. Wasn't quite as effective with the Dodgers this past season, although still very good. And he's going to be 39 by the start of the year. And he wants to be a closer, and we've kind of already re-signed Santiago Suarez, who was our closer last year, to close again for us for the next few years. So not someone that we need to chase after, but certainly a pitcher that we would consider. With the start of the winter meetings, though, going to just check in on the potential market for Dan Keough. Given that we're going to be moving on from him eventually, I don't think his value is going to get much higher if he starts pitching again next year at the age of 26 now. So I think we're inclined to move on from him this year. But we'll see what we can get for him with a potential utility infielder. We'll, kind of look for a second baseman, and then also see what we can potentially get in return for him in terms of pitchers. And if there's someone interesting, maybe we move on from Keough sooner rather than later. And the Yankees would give us Andrew Lovely for him, so that's certainly potentially an option down the line if we still want to wait and see what happens with free agency. He might still potentially be an option for us. Elijah Corsi, a reliever, is another option. He's a right-hander, 24 years old. He has not been good at this point in the majors, with a 70 ERA plus and a 121 FIP minus. And Sierra 4.97. Doesn't necessarily going to indicate that he's going to be a great major league pitcher. But I don't think Keough is going to be either. and Corsi is actually a little younger than Keough, just by a few weeks or a couple months, but still younger than him. And certainly profiles as someone who you could respectably have in the back end of your bullpen and even as a fifth starter in a pinch if you needed. So Corsi is definitely another guy that we would think about potentially trading Keough away for. But I don't think there's anyone here that is such a compelling trade opportunity that it's something we have to do right now. So I think I'm going to kind of just sit and wait and see if maybe we can re-engage with the free agent market over the next month or two. And it's time to start getting ready for the Rule 5 draft. We've got some players who are eligible that have pretty good potential, including Keough, who we just picked up. Obviously, if someone wants to keep him on their major league roster all of next year, let them try to do that. Don't kind of want to get the clock ticking on him by putting him on the 40-man roster. Alex Simmons we're going to have to put on the roster. He was our 8th-round draft pick back in 2032, split last year between AA and AAA, and he was pretty effective at both levels. Certainly looks like he could be a important arm in our bullpen in the not-so-distant future. So we'll certainly put Simmons onto the 40-man roster to reduce the possibility of losing him in the Rule 5 draft. And we'll give a few of these other players some consideration just to make sure that if there's some value in our system, we're trying to keep it around, because we've only got 34 guys on the secondary roster now. So we certainly have the opportunity to add some people through free agency, add some people through trade, and potentially even add some Rule 5 people ourselves, even if we put protect a few more players before the Rule 5 draft happens next week. And we've made it to the Rule 5 draft, where we will obviously be picking last. Let's get the draft going. And we've made it to our pick. Scouting director Travis Lee doesn't suggest that we do anything. So we'll take a look through the players that are available and see if we agree with that assessment. As you may know, we tend to, more often than not, at least pick up a body and bring on somebody as a free option to see him in spring training before we send him back. We'll try to see if there's anyone that we think is worth that. And although Travis Lee doesn't think we should take anybody, we're going to take a flyer on Juan Munoz, 23-year-old who has played in high A ball the last couple of years. So pretty unlikely that he will make our major league roster. But he's a ground ball pitcher who throws in the mid to high 90s. He's got a great personality. Already has good stuff in a major league fastball and a major league sinker. His movement and control aren't great, but he's a left-handed arm, 23 years old, definitely much harder on lefties than he is on righties. If we have a bunch of injuries during spring training, or if Munoz really develops over the next 4 or 5 months, there's a chance that he could be kind of like the 13th pitcher on our roster. So we're going to at least take a flyer on him, bring him onto the team, put him onto the 40-man roster. So moving on to the second round, we'll see if there's anyone else out there that we think is worth bringing on board. And we're going to roll the dice on one other younger player in the Rule 5 draft, Ramon Estrada, a 24-year-old shortstop. Certainly has a nice, versatile glove, can play any position in the infield, and can also play corner outfield positions respectively. He's not a major league hitter, although he has been in the majors parts of each of the last few seasons. The thought is just if we get injuries to Rich Alvarado or Billy Dominguez in spring training, or more likely if a Willie Flores or an Aragato Laziosi suffers an injury that's going to keep them out for an extended period of time in spring training. I think there's an argument that Estrada could be a utility infielder for us next year at the major league level. Really like the glove. Like I said, I don't think he's going to hit enough, and we may have better options in our system, but he's got a good enough glove that I'm willing to take a chance on him. And if it doesn't work out and he doesn't make the team, we just send him back. And we wanted to wait until the beginning of January before re-engaging with Nishi, and unfortunately he signed with the Braves. And the Braves gave him more than we were going to. Looks like an average of 24-ish, $24.5 million a year for 4 years, and doesn't look like there's any player options. So we didn't want to go 4 years. We didn't want to go certainly without some team options in there, and they also offered him more money than we did. So I think he would be better than some of the guys we were thinking about trading for, but you got to hold the line on the way you spend your money at some point. So I think it's probably time to pivot to maybe an Urquiza or a Lovely and see if we can put a trade package together to bring one of those guys onto the team for next year. And I think I'm inclined to try to go after Urquiza rather than Lovely. I think Lovely's a better defensive player, but Urquiza still serves the purpose for us defensively as maybe a starting third baseman, but at the very least someone who can play second, third, and short and give us a better bat than Dominguez and possibly even Alvarado at the major league level. And over the course of his career, Urquiza has been a more productive offensive player than Lovely, even though he doesn't have the same power. He's also durable in terms of his injury proneness, which is something we could use. And his contract is not as expensive as Lovely's is. So we're going to see if we can piece something together for Dave Urquiza. In a perfect world, I'd like to not have to give up Keough in case we want to use him to get somebody else. But I don't want Keough on the team next year. I mean, I think I would have gotten more value for him 2 or 3 years ago when the movement on his pitches, he still had some potential to be better than he ended up, but I don't see much benefit in waiting for too long before trading him away, given that the calendar has flipped to 2037, but still would prefer to hold on to him for another month or two if I can possibly bring on Urquiza without including Keough. Well, you can see that straight up we're definitely not on the easiest trade setting in the game because they would only take some of the top prospects or young players in our whole organization for him. Gilberto Romero, who's the number 48 prospect in baseball, was our international free agent signing back in 2034. Rick Meza, who was our number 1 draft pick couple seasons ago, who's the number 61 prospect in baseball, good-looking young pitcher. Javi Medina, Jorge Lebron, who are both proven solid major leaguers at this point. Bobby Cintrone, who is a very nice corner outfield prospect, but because he can also play the infield, he's going to have a little more value for us. And then Jose Carranza, who's the number 97 prospect in baseball, was our number 1 pick back in the 2033 draft and made it up to Double-A last year. So certainly not going to offer one of the best young players in our system for Urquiza. But if we can put a package together for him with lesser talent, it's still something I would consider. And we've got a deal together for Urquiza. We're giving up some players, but I don't think they're big-time prospects. Jorge Morales, they were pretty high on. You can see he profiles as maybe a close to average major league hitter. And he's a corner infielder, corner outfielder. He's obviously a lot younger than Urquiza, but he's not as good as Urquiza, and I don't think he's ever going to be as good as Urquiza. Center fielder Rick Ortiz, who looks like he's going to have a nice glove, but I don't think he's ever going to hit enough to be a major leaguer. Daniel Smith, who does have a major league bat, but he's a almost 26-year-old first baseman who's nothing special defensively, and certainly would be willing to move on from him. And then starting pitcher Dylan Bowen, who was solid, 9-7 with a 3.08 ERA in Double-A this past year. Was 23 during the season, but certainly doesn't profile as a major league starter. And if we include all of those players, they'll retain 20% of his contract. I'm going to offer him those four and ask them to retain 30% of his contract. If they come back and they just want an absolute throw-in, I might consider doing it, but I'm certainly not going to give up much more than we are to pick up Urquiza right now. Wonder if we retain some of Daniel Smith's salary, whether that would help them, because he's just on a one-year contract now at the major league minimum. If we could retain a lot of that, and then that would make them go for the deal. Yeah, it doesn't look like that's going to really move the needle too much. All right, well, we tried. Probably a silly thought that keeping $700,000 would make a big difference to them. But we're going to go ahead and see if we can bring on Urquiza, since our opportunity to bring on the best free agent who was left on the market has passed us by. And the Rangers did accept the offer, so they're going to retain that extra 10% that we were unsure about. So that'll mean that even in a few years, even when he's making $9 million, only a little over $6 million is going to be our responsibility. Definitely getting towards the expensive side of things if he ends up being a utility infielder for us, which I think he is in a perfect world. But as I said, right now, with Laziosi and Flores on the team playing second and third for us, and the fact that they're both fragile, I think Urquiza is a nice upgrade over either Rich Alvarado or Billy Dominguez to be a fifth infielder for us. And then presumably Alvarado or Dominguez will also make the team as our sixth infielder coming out of spring training if we don't have any injuries. And then obviously there's the young guy that we picked up in the Rule 5 draft. If he blows us away in spring training or we have tons of injuries, he's certainly in the mix also. But I think we are going to go ahead and make this trade. Giving up a little more than I like to, I think. But again, outside of Daniel Smith, I don't really see any of these guys as being major leaguers, long-term major leaguers. And 25-year-old first baseman who's not very good defensively just isn't a position of need for us, given that we've got someone who's much younger and much better at first base already in Jonathan Ojeda. So we're going to go ahead and complete the trade. And some good news, Urquiza's personality is viewed as a positive by the clubhouse, so good to have him on board, and think that we've definitely upgraded our infield. He's certainly not a prime Bobby Witt Jr. by any stretch of the imagination, but we weren't bringing him on to replace Bobby Witt Jr. We're bringing him on to be a member of the team and perhaps a platoon player for us, but perhaps a starter. It will be interesting to see what Bobby Crosby has to say when we put Urquiza onto the active roster, as we talked about earlier in the episode, right now Flores is our third baseman and Laziosi is our second baseman against both righties and lefties. And that's no longer the case. Laziosi is still our second baseman. Flores is our third baseman against righties and left. Oh, actually, they're both still in there. It just means Orquiza is in as our DH against left-handed pitchers. Interesting. So he pushed Jorge Lebron out of the lineup as our DH against left-handers. So we want to make sure we're getting Jorge Lebron some at-bats next year, particularly since we traded Mike McNeil away to open up some space for him. So, we're going to have injuries, and this is by no means a final roster. But I would think if it came down to this being what Crosby wanted to do when we ultimately get down to the 13 players who are on our major league team, we'd probably substitute LeBron in for Urquiza just to guarantee that we get the younger guy some more consistent at-bats. And with Urquiza on board, now the question is, what can we get for Dan Keough? We didn't have to give him up to trade for Orquiza, and now we don't really have that infield hole anymore, so we can just kind of shop Keough, and we'll even throw in veterans. We'll see what we can get for him in terms of pitchers. What's Keough's value look like right now? And I think that we are going to pull a trade off for Keough here. There's kind of four players that we're thinking about. One is Omar Ganoa, 24-year-old in the Rays system, going to turn 25 before the start of the season. Nice personality, good endurance, ground ball pitcher who throws in the mid to high 90s. Left-handed arm, a little more effective against lefties than he is against righties. He wants to be a starter, and I don't think he's a very good major league starter. But he could certainly be a useful arm out of the bullpen, especially against lefties. And he certainly is somebody who could start if we needed him to for a short period of time, or even a half a season if there were injuries. Has very limited major league experience just this past season, but he was a solid major league pitcher when he was up there. So the fact that he's also younger than Keough and a lefty who could start in a pinch is intriguing to me. So Omar Ganoa, definitely one of the four finalists in the trade to finally move on from shaky Keough. Another prospect from the Pirates, also 24 years old, soon to be 25, is Elijah Corsi. Right-handed arm, roughly similar profile to Omar. He has not been quite as effective in the majors. You can see a 70 ERA plus, 121 FIP minus. But it's 2 seasons. And it's largely been as a starter, where I don't think he's going to be very effective. Think he's really a reliever, given that third pitch is just not all that great. I like him. I think I'm leaning towards Omar Ganoa over him, but Corsi is definitely a player that I'm still thinking about. And there's also a couple prospects, not really prospects, trade prospects, but older players who are veterans and not prospects anymore. Jerry Price from the Red Sox is one of them. Right-handed pitcher, going to be 30 years old early next year. Pretty good personality, power pitcher who throws in the high 90s. And you can see he's got better stuff than either of the other pitchers that we've talked about, but he's fragile physically. Not the best movement on his pitches, but hopefully, he throws hard enough to limit the homers, although he did give up 10 in 44 and a third innings last year. He had been a pretty effective major league pitcher in his first 3 seasons. Last year in 2036, though, 7.31 ERA, and allowed those 10 homers and 44 and a third innings pitched. And he's also going to be 30 years old, so I think he might be a real good arm out of the bullpen for us, but he's also older and he gives up home runs. Probably not as many as Keough, but still is going to give up some home runs, which isn't optimal. But he is in the mix. And then Melvin Vasquez, 28-year-old from the Orioles. Good personality, ground ball pitcher who throws in the high 90s with good movement. So probably not going to give up tons of home runs compared to some of the other players. You can see he's been a bit below average over the course of his career in terms of his ERA plus and his FIP minus at the major league level. Has the stamina to start in a pinch, but really doesn't have a third pitch with that mediocre changeup. So he is really a bullpen arm. So, Vasquez and Price are kind of an older left-hander and an older right-hander who we're thinking about trading away Dan Keough for. And then we've also got the two younger guys to think about in terms of the right-handed 24-year-old Elijah Corsi and then the 24-year-old left-hander Omar Ganoa. And I think we're going to go with Omar Ganoa. Don't love the low control. Our scout still thinks he can get a little better with his control and his movement. If you look at what the OSA thinks, they think his control can get up to a 45 also. So he's always going to walk some batters, which isn't optimal. But I think he's a pretty good left-handed reliever who certainly does have the stamina and a 4-pitch arsenal, even though the slider and the changeup aren't that great. So he could start for us in a pinch. Good at holding on runners, not the biggest thing in the world, but particularly for someone who doesn't have the best control in the world, that helps. And he's younger than Keough. He's got a great personality, good work ethic. Hopefully we can get him fully developed with our good coaching at the major league level. So while it's disappointing to let go of a guy who a few years ago we thought was going to be a key part of our pitching rotation, I just don't think that at 26 years old already, with parts of 2 seasons in the majors, I love the fact that the guy strikes out a batter in a half an inning, but he also gives up a home run almost every 3 innings, and that's just not going to cut it. And he doesn't throw all that hard, and his movement we don't think is going to get better. The OSA thinks it's even worse than our scout thinks it is. I think it's time to move on from Mr. Keough. And we tried to get a little more for Keough, and they really weren't able to or willing to give us anything. So I guess we can see if they'll keep a little bit of Ganoa's even at 5%, they won't give us anything. So it seems like they view this as a pretty even trade. I think in terms of upside, if things shift dramatically, Keough still has more upside, but I just don't think he's going to realize it at this point. So we are going to move on and bring on Omar Ganoa as, perhaps the last pitcher that we need to add to our bullpen this offseason. And fans unhappy that we let Dan Keough go, but they're pleased by the signing of Omar Ganoa. So hopefully that all evens out there. If we take a look at the front office, still have 100 for fan interest. So we are making progress little by little. So with the trades for Ganoa and Orquiza, I feel like we've kind of done what we needed to do this offseason. You can see we kind of got 15 players on the major league roster right now. We got 15 pitchers, so obviously we're going to need to be cutting people from both of these lists to get down to 26 when we're coming out of spring training. The issue, or I don't know if it's an issue, is we still have tons of money to potentially spend since we really haven't done anything in free agency except for the minor league prospect that we signed. So do we want to go bring on another reliever who's making like $10 million a year? I don't know that we really do. Do we want to bring on Carter Binns to catch for us, who's a guy that we had in our system until this past year, and he went over in Korea last season where he led the league in on-base percentage, and now he's coming back looking for decent money as a 38-year-old. He's good defensively and a good personality, but he's not a major league hitter at this point. So no need to bring someone like him on board. Our old outfielder, Jacob Guerrero, he's really gone downhill since we picked him up. Fragile physically. I think we got about the best out of him when we had him that 1 year. 305 batting average, 38 homers, 105 ribbies, and then he was looking for big money after that. And we had Dylan Cruz coming off of a season-long injury to take his spot in the lineup back then. And he was reasonably productive his first 3 years with Oakland, but kind of really fell off last year. And you can see he missed most of the season with that torn labrum. And while we're reminiscing, it's been a few seasons since I checked in on Shi Tong Kin. I don't know. I know his last name was Kin. So I want to see what he has done over the course of his career. Obviously, since I didn't type in his whole name, he's going to be a lot harder to find. Is he already retired? I think it was Shi Tong Kin. Yes, Shi Tong Kin. I do remember. Oh, he's already retired. He was 31 years old when he retired. Oh, he retired after this past season. So he looks like he ended up playing out that contract with Colorado. He had 2 brilliant years for us when he first came up. We signed him out of Taiwan. Was a gold glove winner for us in 2029, was an all-star in 2028, and he came back in 2030, and his ratings, even though he was only 24 years old, had just completely fallen apart, and we had signed him to, I think, a 7 or 8 year contract at pretty good money, thinking that he was going to be a huge part of our team for years to come. Fortunately, we had to give up a prospect or two with him, I believe, but we were able to get Colorado to take that contract from us, and you can see 254 with 14 homers and 64 ribbies a couple seasons ago in Colorado was the best season he had. For his career, he hit just 231 in Colorado after putting up a 274 batting average with us, which included his horrible start to that 2030 season. So that is a contract that I am glad we were able to move on from. But back to the present, there's not a lot for us to spend money on in free agency right now. I think I may peruse the trade block, see if there's anyone particularly interesting there. We want to, kind of replenish our minor league teams. You can see that between AAA, AA, and high A ball, we certainly don't have enough players on any of those rosters right now. Now we will be moving up some players from the Dominican League and the Arizona League and low A ball to kind of fill out some of those teams, but certainly need some more bodies there. So we'll be working on some minor leaguers to hopefully fill out our farm system in the coming weeks. And also going to, as I said, take a look at the trade block and just see if maybe there's someone with a big 1 year contract that a team is looking to get out from under that we can bring on who might be able to help us this coming season, because our goal is the four-peat. It feels a bit bold to say that, but we want to win every year, and if we win this year, it's a four-peat. So that's what we're going to try to do. And certainly with the amount of money we've potentially got to spend, would love to bring on some more talent to help us try to do that. So in our next episode, we'll get to the final stages of the 2037 off season, go through spring training, and then see what the Royals roster looks like as we get ready to kick off the 2037 season. Until then, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.